Biodiversity is actually a really important concept when you're thinking about how an ecosystem functions, and there are lots of reasons for this. So for an ecosystem to function sustainably over a long term, you really need a good variety of species within that ecosystem. So the different species will contribute different elements to a functional ecosystem, and the bigger variety of organisms you have doing similar jobs, the better chance you have of things going on, even if they're threats to that particular ecosystem. So variety is really what you're thinking about when you think about biodiversity. So you can think about variety in terms of species. So how many plant species, what kind of functions do they have, how many herbivores, how many carnivore species, but also how many links are there between those species. And we think about it in terms of resilience, so that the more species and the more links between the species, the more resilient that ecosystem will be to changes over time. But there's another layer to that as well. So within those species, within those organisms, you also want as much variety as possible. So you want as much diversity as possible. And that also helps with being able to survive catastrophes or changing situations, changing environmental conditions. If all of your organisms within a species are exactly the same, then just one threat might take them all out together. So with a bit of variation between individuals, then if something disastrous happens, some will survive, whereas some others may not survive. So really you want as much variation as possible within that species or within that population. And sometimes we think about that in terms of genetic diversity. So the extreme end of the situation is you have a bunch of clones. So individuals of that species are all genetically exactly the same, which is not ideal, again, from the idea that if something comes along and takes out one of those individuals, it's likely to take out all of the individuals. So instead of losing a few, you lose an entire population. So genetic diversity is really important, and it's something that increasingly we try to measure within populations, within species, because it gives us a good idea of how likely that population or that species is to survive in the longer term. And there are some species for which genetic diversity is really very small, so all the individuals are very similar to each other. So something like cheetah, visually you can see they're all very similar, but actually genetically they're also very similar, and it means that long term they are at higher risk than another similar species with lots of genetic diversity, because, as I say, one threat could take out a whole species or a whole population rather than just a few individuals. So biodiversity on lots of different levels is really important for long-term sustainability of the species within ecosystems, and then ultimately the functions that ecosystem has.